All right. Well, thank you all for coming back. We are sure happy to be here doing this. So, I am up here today with three absolutely phenomenal people whose accomplishments run so deep. I'm rather daunted to be sitting up here with them. I'm not kidding. Wait till you hear about them. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read their bios, but phenomenal work they're doing. So I think we should start with each of you introducing yourself, if you would. And let's do that first. Do you want to start, Taramona? And do you want to do a land acknowledgement for us? Okay, great.
Kia ora ana, no Rarotonga Aitutaki me Mangaia tōku mama, no Jamaica, Cuba, Suriname tōku papa, kei te noho ana hau ki Tāmaki Makaurau ki Aotearoa, ki ngā whānau, kei hau e whā ngā tamariki, e whā ngā mokopuna. Ko te mana roughly tōku ingoa. I'm just giving you an introduction and telling you where my mother and my father are from, the lands that they're from, and where my ancestors are from. I live in Auckland, New Zealand, and I live there with my 4 sons, who are spread around the country now, actually, and I have 4 grandchildren. Yeah, that's pretty much me. But while we're sitting here, we just think a little bit about our ancestors that are with us always. And I love the way that you opened us today, Rebecca. That was beautiful. And I had a little bit of a tangi, a little bit of a cry there, thinking about those who've passed recently. But we are never alone. Never alone. Me taki. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the invitation here. My name is Kareem Jackson. When I was 12 years old, I gave myself the name Tef Poe. A lot of people ask me, well, what is Tef Poe? What does that mean? When I was 12, I didn't know what it meant either. I was walking down the street, freestyling, and the 2 words came to me. Tef is a Ethiopian grain. That's what I later learned. And Poe is short for poetry. So the name means food for thought. For me, it's my actual name. It's not a Kareem and Tef Poe. It's my actual name. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I come here from St. Louis by way of Boston. I am a hip hop fellow at Harvard through Nasir Jones, the actual God MC Nas. I get to use his name in my introduction, and that's a grave privilege for a person from my lineage. But we'll talk more about a bunch of the other stuff later.
Hi y'all, I'm Umi Sue. I use they, them pronouns. Talk about my name as well. Umi actually is a chosen name. It means the ocean, and I chose it about 5 years ago and had a legal name change. I'm trans and non-binary, and grew up here in Virginia, across the river, but actually in Tidewater area. Moved to Virginia when I was 12 from Taipei, and the sort of drastic soundscape change made me who I am today. Been sort of after sounds of migration, thinking about people, communities, and how they move across spaces, and how communities can continue to thrive in this changing world.
And I'm Kate Becker, and I have worked in nonprofits for most of my careers, and these days I am the Creative Economy and Recovery Director in Executive Constantine's office, who most of you met earlier today. So all of us have worked in music, in activism, and in creating change. So I'm wondering if each of you would frame up some of the work that you've been doing, assuming that not everyone in the room has read your bios yet, but give people a sense of who you are and what you're working on.
Well, currently in my day job, I am a creative economy strategist for economic development and cultural agency for our local government. I was privileged with the opportunity to write the first creative economy strategy for our region. It was released in May this year. I don't have a background in policy. I went to university to look at business and stuff in my 20s, I think it was, and I found it really boring. So I left after the first year and graduated with something, I don't know what it was. I used my gut instinct to make decisions in everything in my life, and my work is no different. I don't separate myself in terms of from creativity or being creative. Everything I do is creative. Whether I'm making dinner, walking down the road, it's creative, yo. And so I've approached my work in local government in that same way. I understood the remit of the purpose of having local government, these controlling institutions, is to have a positive impact on the people that we serve. It's not quite working like that all the time. So I felt that the best way for me in this space, it wasn't necessarily designed for me. And then the system on top of that, which was not designed for many people, I would just bring my whole self to the table every time I'm present in spaces, which is why I talk your ears off if you come and talk to me. I prefer to be present and bring my whole self every single time. No apologies, no. And I'm not being offensive. I'm not meaning to be offensive in any way, but I treat people the way that I would like to be treated. And that's how I operate.
Thanks, Tara. Tara?
I do a lot of things. I'm an artist first and foremost. I think that's important because growing up as a young Black boy in a Republican state, just having the notion to think that I could be a professional musician of any sort was just such a wild pitch to working class people. But I consider myself a working class artist. So I work for my money through the means of art. And I've been blessed in many ways that my life has led me to one where I use my natural talents to exist, if that makes any sense. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm into. And I've found ways to intellectualize those things, I feel, and make them mean more than just words scribbled in a notebook or, just jotted mumble jumble in the Pro Tools. So I am a rapper, but in 2022, there is a pinch of shame with saying that sometimes. So I have to say I'm a rapper, and Barack Obama called me to the White House, and this happened, and that happened, and that happened, and that happened. In this current iteration of my existence, just being a hip hop artist isn't good enough. And unfortunately, as a Black male in America, is never good enough. I can add 1,000 things to that. Never be good enough. So I have always felt like politics and art were kind of closely woven together. And I never knew that there was a distinction between the two. I grew up on late 90s hip hop. That's when I was coming into myself. 1996 was a very important year for me. And I'll try to close, but I'm just giving some context for why I do the work that I do. So I'm approaching the world through a late 90s hip hop gaze. A kid who saw his biggest influences get assassinated. Tupac was gunned down. Biggie was gunned down. I'm entering the world of consciousness through Wu-Tang Clan and Bahamadia and these artists that a lot of people may not even know who they are, but they were very important MCs to me in my self-discovery process, knowledge itself process. And so I always thought that activism was a component of hip hop. I never knew that it was not. I later discovered as an adult that I was doing something bizarre to people by mixing the two. So in 2014, a young boy in my neighborhood was gunned down by a police officer by the name of Darren Wilson. I was on tour at the time, and we had a layover at home. And I went to the area. These are the same streets that he was gunned down on. I walked those streets 1 trillion times in my life. So we went to the location, and one day of showing up at the scene ended up with me being there for over 400 days of protest and close resistance against the police. From there, I've started an organization and ended up working at Harvard. Today I work for an organization that I started by the name of Black Men Build, which is, we focus on organizing and pulling Black men away from Republican indoctrination and misinformation, trying to reverse patriarchy, homophobia, and the effects of misogyny in the Black community as well. Really focusing on the issues that cause young men to go astray and try to turn Black men back into productive members of the movement for Black liberation.
That was incredible. Hard to follow. So I'll say my path is slightly, I don't know, more, since we're on a college campus, I'll talk about kind of the academic turned something else path, which I do have a degree in an academic degree in ethnomusicology. And when I finished that, I moved to LA and I wanted to do something different from just what everyone else around me in school did, which is that they teach, which is a great job. And I felt like I wanted to see the impact of my work sooner and in more concrete ways. So I ended up becoming a civil servant. I worked through a fellowship called ACLS Public Fellowship. I ended up becoming the first digital strategist at the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. And then at the time, there's in 2013, there's a lot of change happening in Los Angeles, gentrification, displacement, a lot of sort of development, really quick, sort of urban development that was happening. A lot of musicians were questioning affordability, which that's off the roof now, literally off the roof. And so I wanted to do something with what I knew from school, and I wasn't sure how to do that. And so I was sort of observing just what was happening within the municipal context. And I don't know how much I want to get into now, because I think you're going to probably ask more questions about it. But what I did was I turned a kind of an academic curiosity about music, ecosystem, sustainability, all those things I learned in school. And I started like prodding and asking questions and learning just how how a city's government structure, like municipality, the cultural affairs department, economic development, urban planning, all those different entities that are all set up like a machine, behemoth machine. How do I start just putting a little friction into the machine, asking to see, how we can better support, an environment for musicians to thrive, because, so much of that system was set up so long ago, it was no longer serving the people. So, but yeah, I'll talk a bit more. I think there was like some policy stuff and then some really outdated granting system as well. But yeah, that's what I ended up doing, civil service.
All right. So all of you have worked on moving us towards a better world, some within civic service, some as activists, as musicians. So, let's talk about how we affect policy. How do we influence policy? How have you all personally been involved in trying to change the game?
Change the game. I don't like the system. So I have issues with that to start off with. I don't influence policy. The project that I did before the creative economy strategy was around Pacific people's workforce challenge. It was looking at why Pacific people in our city were not able to progress within the labor market. So we're talking about people that were getting around about $15 an hour for around about 15 years, which is not even the minimum wage. And why nothing was being done in that space, how were they not able to progress. So we interviewed both employees and employers. We interviewed businesses, small businesses, and we used their lived experience as the data, because we like data in civil service. So we provided the data for them, and we were able to secure $22 million to support programs that would be rolled out across 3 different agencies, a grassroots agency, one of our units within our agency, and a social innovation unit that's part of council, actually, a newly established agency, to create the programs that were required to do just that. And it wasn't like some sort of, this is some money, here go. They then engaged the people that they served to see what they wanted. This is a fantastic opportunity. We can talk to people and ask them what they want. And that's what they did. And so I'm not sure that it affects policy, but it affects the way that things are done. And that's one of the issues, right? So behaviors and values and all those things that within the system that make the system so wonderful. For some people and really not for other people. It's like Santi was saying about the system that we're working within. And there was a sister at the beginning of the day that asked one of the people that was up here a question around, well, what do we do inside this capitalist system that we've got? If we start looking first at the fact, and this was the challenges that I found when I started working in council, the people we're serving were being used like they were assets. And when I think of musicians and the things that musicians are very unhappy about, it's because I believe, and I am a musician as well, is that we were treated like assets. And if you look at the definition of assets, what an asset is, and you think that that's what musicians have been labeled as, the language needs to change. And so with my, thank you, with my job, as you can imagine in this bureaucratic space, I'm changing that language on a daily basis. I don't care. You know what I mean? When people are talking about distributing music, I say, actually, you're trying to connect with people. That's what you're doing. So that's what your role is, connecting, not distributing. Distributing is a whole other thing, and it's attached to everything else, that system that's in there. So just having conversations with my colleagues in official meetings and also in presentations. I'm the tree-hugging hippie in our agency. And yeah, just getting that language in there with them, and it's working. Yeah.
Absolutely awesome, Terramana. Yes.
As I was just sitting here thinking about so many different things, but definitely on a political level, in 2015, I believe, I went to Geneva, United Nations, with the parents of Michael Brown Jr. And we testified on behalf of the community about what would appear to be terrorist violence, styled violence against people, and very specific incidents of police brutality. And that was a really heavy moment for me, because I felt like I relate to you when you say you bring your total self into the room, and so many things that you've already said, but that specifically, because I think that's important as an artist. By me being there, that meant that my community's artistic community was in that room, having a very serious input on a very serious moment in a global context. And for the lineage of work that I come from, I attach that moment to the work that people like Malcolm X was trying to accomplish with getting the United Nations to take a more firm stance for human rights. against certain infractions of militant violence implicated upon citizens in the U.S. by our own bodies of armed protectors and so forth. And to just be there in that moment for me really meant that hip hop was in the room, and that art was not only making an impact, but I was now merging into a space where my art was meaning more than just, what I thought it meant. And I had to consider myself a sincere representative of people in a way that could move things politically, just beyond the dial of what an artist is supposed to be able to accomplish.
Incredible.
Yeah. Wow. So it's hard to follow again. But I'm going to say something that's actually going to echo what you were saying. When I started at Cultural Affairs, this weird thing, like I was trying to pay attention to how people talk about music. And, us being neighbors with this sort of the media industry, music industry right next door, right? Like the sort of transnational big giant businesses. And there's a lot of incentive for them to kind of like have international and transnational impact. But they could care less about local impacts, in fact. Like local economy isn't really on their agenda. And so what was strange is that from the perspective of the city of Los Angeles was that the city was like, oh, okay, well, we've got the big giants over there, like they take care of it. Meanwhile, there's so many musicians who are not really being taken care of. In fact, the people who are in that industry are not being taken care of. We just learned so much from Santi Gold about that. So, what is going on here? There's a schism. And, and in fact, it was sort of like this myth, okay, we're just going to go with the industry's assumption of music. That's not find ways to to really think about actually what it takes to do this. The affordability issues, right? And livability. How do you live and work in the city? The different genres of music. Also, don't really translate into how something can sell or not. Really seeing music as a product was not going to be a helpful way for a municipality to think about its policies. And in fact, its granting system too. It's not just about how you can sell this stuff. What about the people who make it? And, in fact, there are so many different kinds of music that requires different ways of being in the community for these, for the actual musical practices to thrive. So there's at one point where we did some data collecting, and the project was actually associated with HUD. So it was actually a federally related project, and we did cultural asset mapping in the neighborhoods, and we asked the community what they saw as being culturally significant. And that was a game-changing moment because, we were going to go outside of our usual definition of music. And we weren't going to just let the free market capitalist logic support itself. We were actually asking people, it turns out in this corner on Sunday afternoon, there is an Afro-Cuban ensemble that's there, and they've been there for 2 decades. How do we support them? There are these mariachi musicians in East LA, and they have this sort of practice of busking, and then they play live music, but they need a place to store their instruments during the day. When they're not out there, when they're doing their business, they need a place to get on a computer. So then they actually get their business out to people who are not just driving by the mariachi square. So different groups of people, different musicians have different needs. And so our cultural asset mapping project got us, the sort of the people who sit inside of the office, in the municipal government to sort of, to learn actually music isn't just a product. And in fact, it's sort of this lively thing that's a part of this ecosystem that has this complicated economy that's embedded in everybody else's kind of, spaces in that same world. So it goes into this sort of idea of the ecosystem that you all have been talking about. But that's the opposite direction of what the industry has been thinking of. International impact, local embeddedness. How do we reconcile the two? And those are the questions that I've been prodding, like in the sort of cultural affairs circles. And I think that there have been some successes, but mostly I think it's about kind of like changing that language that you're talking about, which is, yeah, that work.
My name also means rolling waves of the ocean, by the way.
Oh my God. I love that.
So, Umi, you were in that critical role inside LA Cultural Affairs, and you decided to leave. And did you decide to leave because you were done with what you set out to accomplish? Were you worn down by the bureaucracy of it all? Were you figuring you could make more impact elsewhere? Why'd you decide to leave?
I left for lots of reasons. In part, I think it was not a good place for me. I was just, going through a transition, legal name change, all that bathroom stuff. It was difficult in the city. That's a part of the symptoms of like the behemoth structure, is that there's not a whole lot of humanness in there. So personally, it wasn't a good place for me. But I remain active, as an activist, as a cultural organizer in Los Angeles. And I've just been like, connecting myself with different communities to find different ways in which like organizers and communities have found, ways to survive and thrive, given that the government actually doesn't try very hard to care for them. So that's what I've been doing, kind of in part still putting on my hat as an ethnographer, learning, but also making changes happen in these different circles. And I found some really cool things, like, for instance, there is y'all probably know the Lindas, right? At this point. Yeah, so the Lindas is like this like really awesome punk rock group. They're about 15 years old. They all came out of LA. And what happens was one of the members, the bassist, her dad, Martin Wong, co-founder of Giant Robot, he saw that the elementary school of his child had basically a funding cut of their music program. And he took it upon himself to organize a series of fundraisers. And he was like, back in the 80s and actually late 70s, Chinatown was a hub for punk rock. And he was like, why don't I try to rekindle that by bringing back all these punk rockers that I listen to? He's a Gen Xer. And I bring back these guys and then try to like get people to come out and see them so they can like basically like contribute donations to fund the school program at the local elementary school. So like Chinatown has been a place where like people can't really like live there because of gentrification, and then like a lot of the workspaces have gotten more expensive. So like college kids from like art school, like Cal Arts, have been doing programming there, but like not anything to relate to the local economy. So what Martin Wong did was really phenomenal. So he brought in bands like I think on the bill that my band was on, Chuck Dukowski was there from a Black Flag, and his family band with his wife and son were there playing, and then like all these kids, like elementary school kids, were running around listening to these punk rockers playing music, and the Lindas literally grew out of that scene, listening to this music. I thought that was a cool way to sort of like bring together sort of like different memories of a musical genre, a music scene, but in ways that directly benefit a local community.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you a question that we didn't touch base on at all in advance, but what do you think? Why does it matter? Why should all of us care about public policy, and what can we do to be influencing that public policy?
Because it's about us. It's supposed to be for us. I realized that when I joined council. In fact, when I joined 5 years ago, I didn't even know that I sat in the policy office. The role was called Social Innovation Specialist Advisor for Pacificness. That was my actual title. Does anybody know what that means? Exactly. I never did in 2 years, 3 years actually. Once I got in there and understood that I sat in this policy office, because I obviously walked around and asked everybody, what do you do? What do you do? They explained. I was like, oh, right, so this is how it works. Then we have this Auckland plan, a plan for the whole city that everybody looks to and plans everything from all our council-controlled organisations. And once I got in there, I realised these are all the people that can make our city better, but in partnership with the people. How about that? And so that's what I do, and wherever I can, I will educate people around, not like a preacher, but I say, if you just fill out that little piece of paper that actually turns up in your letterbox and it says, what would you like in your area? It actually goes to somebody and they read it because I've seen them. You know what I mean? And I know how those decisions are made now. Prior to that, I used to throw that piece of paper in the mailbox away too, because I was like, what was it for? Use it to light a fire. You got a fireplace over here, by the way. Once I realized that it was just, it's actually very simple. Local government is a civil servant. Local government, central government, for me, and my understanding is that they are there to serve the people. And if they're not doing that, they're not doing it very well. And if they're just serving one section of society, that's not really well either. And if there are people suffering in our city, we know we can eradicate poverty. We know we can, but we don't. It's about policy, because that's the system. That's what drives that system. So you have to get in there and, people have asked me, why do you work? Then I said, because I can't do all of this strictly as a rapper and as a singer. I can't do all of this. I have to allow my creativity within this beast and not try to poke anybody in the eye with my pen while I'm talking to them, and understand this system so that I can break it. And on the other side, I create music that heals. That's just what I do. And I'm not being fake or putting on a facade for any of it. I'm just being me. And so I'm told that I shouldn't really use the word manipulate when I'm trying to influence people to do what I want them to do. But I think we decided on motivate. Try and motivate people to think a little bit differently and behave a little bit differently, and actually see that if you don't finish doing this one job, you actually affect the life of somebody out there that you don't know, but it has an effect on someone else, another human being. And so all my work is human-centric. There's no doubt, without, because that's how I would be naturally anyway. So that's the term that they use, then human-centric it is. Yeah.
So it's so hard to follow. There's a hip hop producer by the name of Alchemist who has a quote that I have tried to live by for many years. He said that by choosing to participate in the selling of music, we have to admit that we're doing something unnatural. That music was not created necessarily to become a consumable product, and the science of figuring out how to sell music then to mass amounts of people is just absolutely unnatural. And as an artist, I live by that, because I know that every day I am participating in an industry that's choosing to try to manifest the unnatural. And in return, the same industry is telling me on a daily basis that my contributions to their already unnatural disposition are not good enough. Take it back and sound like this guy. Take it back and remix it. Take it back, take it back, take it back, take it back. I've been signed twice to different labels, to two major deals. And each time it did not work for me, because I had to cultivate my fan base so independently that by the time that the majors did come with their agenda, the agenda didn't match the agenda that I had built for many years for me and my fan base. So it just would be like watching a television show, and then all of a sudden now you turn that. No, there's no explanation for why there's a new set of characters. It's it's like same script. Everybody's acting like everything's normal, but it's like and I'm trying to convince my fans like it's all good, and I'm looking like a freaking fool. So I learned very quickly that the politics of things dictates a lot of what my eventual outcome could be as an artist and what I could accomplish for my community as an artist. And I wish that we instilled this in artists on an institutional level, but also I understand that that's not everybody's calling. Everybody isn't meant to be a rabble rouser. At the end of the day, we are Americans, and a lot of us like to have shame about that. But the sins of one are the sins of all. And this is a country where we do tell people that it's okay to just get to the money. You are the person that is getting to the money. You make the most sense, and in most cases, that's just the basic logic. So, as an artist, I have had to find ways to stand up infrastructure in a city that has no industry infrastructure. The only rapper to ever make it out of St. Louis is Nelly. He blew up and sold 20 million gazillion records. But what people don't know is he came from a very, 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 very strong local infrastructure where the same teachers he had, I had. He just got on an airplane and went to LA before the rest of us did. But he comes from the same community that we had, people telling people, that's not how you hold a mic. If you're going to be performing, you need a DJ. We had to assume that we were the Ice Cubes, the Scarfaces, the Tupacs, the Little Kims of the community because nobody was coming to Missouri to pick us up. There's no Def Jam in the backyard. So you have to have realistic goals. And I think that policy influences realistic goals in ways that if there is no policy to influence your goals, you think there's 100,000 songs a day that are uploaded to these digital streamers. You think you have some magic bullet that you can just upload that's going to shoot you to the top of the charts from your parents' basement. There are politics involved that really influence all of these things. And we have to start educating people about that.
Yeah.
I think so. This is. I started getting into gardening in the pandemic, and I really got into composting, and and then I'm just learning so much about like decaying, and how decay is part of the new rebirth for something else. So and what I'm going at is that I think if we think about music as a sort of this like ecosystem, it's like there's sort of liveness to it, and that there's some things that come into the foreground and other things that recede into the background, and that it's not just that one thing all the time, so like that competitive logic of capitalism, that maybe we can find a way to like coexist. And the industry isn't really into that because they want to just like find out one thing and really milk it and actually turn it into something that sells a lot. That's not a really ecological way of thinking. And so I've just been thinking about like, how do we rethink, right? Like, how do we exist and rethink so that we're all living organisms together, and that there's a plurality, and that there's a life cycle, like different generations of people. Different generations of artists, and how do we exist intergenerationally, right? Like getting into the ideas about like teachings and ancestors, right? So I feel like policy at its finest actually can produce an environment for this liveliness to exist. It shouldn't get in the way. And I also think that policy can do harm reduction, which means that, it could do the things to regulate the things that get in the way of this liveliness. Like, like things that, really lock us into a pattern. So then we're having to productize all the time. We're having to use social media. We're having to like drive, distribution in a certain way. I think policy can actually like put a dampener on some of that.
Well, it's like you keep on saying, right? The competitive capitalistic logic that we're up against all the time. The system says that we have to keep on selling, keep on selling, keep on selling. And so if you remove yourself, because the music's not going to happen without the musician. I don't understand why musicians are not at the center of what we, when we talk about, we saw a diagram that was up there at the beginning of the day. I have issues with the stuff that were in the blue bubble, the things that were in the blue bubble, which talked about labels and commercialization, commodification and marketing and all that sort of stuff. being part of the ecosystem. Yeah, it is, but does it have to be? You know what I mean? Like, let's think really differently about what we do. Say something, Umi. Go on, say it.
Working on it. I'll say it.
But yeah, if we switch up, the language, and we, Kate Woolworth is an economist, and she has a framework called donut economics, which I think cities like Amsterdam have already implemented, like for the last couple of years through the pandemic. And it's looking at how economic development, and I don't actually use that word at all in my strategy, I call it economic transformation, is that we should not be going outside of our natural resources. Now, if you stuck a musician in this donut economic framework, it'd be interesting to see what is actually necessary within their ecosystem, and for them to thrive the way that they want to thrive, not the way that they're told that they need to thrive. And for our babies that are coming through, I mean, I can't even deal with what our babies are dealing with, that they're coming through music and living their life off social media, and their values are being set up by these people who are calling themselves musicians, who probably are in some way, but they're showing this lifestyle, which is not something I've ever experienced in the 35 years that I've been a musician, ever. And I've had major record deals, and I've had the label guy driving me around and going to the forums and the Sonys and all of that. I've had all of that. And you know what? I didn't like it. And I was in my 20s, and I'd had my first child and bought my first house at 20. And so my grounding, even though I left home at 14, my grounding was my family when I got into the industry. And the deeper I got into it, the more I realized I really don't like it. But I love making music. And so I knew that I had to step back, and then I put my husband forward, who's a rapper, and he was rapping before we got together, and I just put all my energy into what he wanted to do, because I still have love for music. It doesn't stop, and I know there's that beast out there, but we've been running independently for the last 20 years or so now, just doing whatever we want to do. And it was really, it took off from the fact that he received a letter from his record label after a major label he was with for 10 years. And when the contract was up, they just sent him a letter. Didn't call him, nothing. They just sent him a letter. Said, see ya.
Yeah,
But
that's normal.
here's the thing though. We're still having to pay back money, apparently, that he was given, which they never showed us a record of. So by the time I stepped in, it was too late. They said, oh, we had to move office and we lost all the records. This is their excuse. And we're talking about 6 figures. So we're still paying this off now. You know what I mean? So that's why he will never sign with a major label again. And that's why we do things independently, and we don't care about schedules. We don't care about having to do things at a certain time. We're just doing what we need to do. When we work in many areas simultaneously while we make music and release music and share music, it's just part and parcel of what we do. And that's our ecosystem. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, I think sometimes, at least in my mind, I think of places like New Zealand as being potentially more enlightened than we are here in America. And yeah, to know you have those struggles, Tara. God, yeah. All right. So, is it artists' responsibility to hold their political leaders accountable? And if so, how can they do that? Or how can we all support them in doing that?
I mean, I feel like that's an appropriate question for me, but I mean that's a loaded question, honestly, because me a few years ago I probably would have said, yes, a younger, more mature version of me. I have a less nuanced answer for that. I would say absolutely, a more nuanced. Human, in tune with myself version of me, I don't think it's their obligation. We're placing the obligation of the society on people who just so happen to be talented at a thing. And what we're discovering is that hasn't always gone in our favor. So what I believe is that I think we as humans have a deeper obligation in this time than we've typically had, period. And I think some of us are leaning into that obligation. I think some of us are going through an awakening about what those obligations might look like for us personally. I think it's we're in the phase of the movie where it's time to pick a side. The Thanos snap has occurred, and look around. This is who's left. So this is who you're gonna have to figure it out with. And I think that that's where we're at. I think whether you're an artist, my parents aren't artists at all. They can't relate to my lifestyle. They're middle class, not even middle class at this point, because what is the middle class? But they are Missourian black folks that live in St. Louis, been a couple places, but not really anywhere besides past the Mississippi River. Even they, in terms of just being everyday citizens who are paying taxes, who are having an influence on the social zeitgeist, they're not artists, but they have an obligation. And I think where the obligation of art does come into play is that art has always been a social vanguard in pushing the conversation of humanity forward. And if the art of the time isn't taking on that obligation, then we have to start to interrogate the utility of the art. Because the point of art is progress, social progress, not social backtracking. You know what I'm saying? And when you really think about the turn of the 20th century, the highest paid entertainers in Black America were people who did minstrel shows. And when you look at turn of the century currently, I would suggest that a lot of these people are reinventing the minstrel show. And as sometimes I question the psyche of white America as it processes and digests certain things. And I say, I pray for the dignity of my white brothers and sisters as well, because I'm saying you're consuming things that America has told you are cool for you to consume, that have dehumanized other people's experiences. And now we're at a point where we have the intellectual fortitude to look at something and say, you know, that was a cool Saturday Night Live performance, but what was really dignified about that? And it's just time for us all to understand that social standards need to raise, point blank, period.
Yeah, but yep, that was a very excellent answer. So I got nothing to add to that. I would have been the same as well, though. I would have been saying, jump on board. Now, one of the things that I've done is I've developed, I didn't really talk about this in my intro because it would be here all day. I've got a research and development project with central government, and it's about what would an artist-led collective of musicians working towards systems transformation, what would that look like? So central government are paying me to do this. And when I finished the project, I said to them, would you like to use my templates and frameworks that I developed from this and how I did the project and how I engaged with the community? And they said, that would be great because this is a partnership. This is what they said to me. This is a partnership. This is central government. And I was like, yes, it is. And so that's why I'm doing it. The fact that they've opened their minds enough to think that, you know what we're doing isn't that great. We could do things much better. They've let an artist like me come along, apply for funding for a project where I'm actually going to pay artists. The idea is to pay artists. So this money is going back to artists for the data that they exchange. And I'm looking at a way for a passive income to come out of this project for these artists after the project. So it's continuous and self-sustainable. You know, so it's just think about things differently. Just think about things differently. And when I've got these artists, which is the real trick behind it all, what do you think I'm going to talk to them about? Local government, what are you doing? That little thing in your mailbox. I'm gonna go there with all of them because if I have that opportunity, I will. It won't be blasted at them, but I'll do it in the most human way possible so they know that what they say, what they do has this type of effect. And sometimes you just need to be told that, you know what I mean? So yeah, Sorry, I wasn't adding to your answer because your answer was excellent. But yeah, yeah, but yeah, that's how I look at it too.
So where are the opportunities for us right now? What are the things that we, the people in this room, the people we are connected to, can do to move things forward? Where are the opportunities that we're not acting on, or the ones that need more oomph behind them? I mean, that's a loaded question, I know, but
I feel education. Education for me is one that I've acquired through lived experiences. And I think we have to stop discounting the lived experiences of others. We have to really start to dig deep and realize that we are all having human experiences. And the perception of one said experience is based upon really the card that you were blessed or lucky enough to draw in the societal biological gamble.
mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we don't want to deal with the realities of this American project that was started many eons before a lot of us were even born, right? We're now the people who have inherited it, and it's our turn to make a lot of decisions about whether it's cool or whether it just keeps on going as it goes. And then another generation of folks later look at it and go, well, damn, they kind of pump fake like they gave a damn about changing the world, but, you know, they really didn't give that much of a damn. You know, they gave a half a damn, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, we have a chance to give a full damn. The clock is ticking, you know, and the story is being told. And I'm implicating myself in that because a lot of times, even people on the panels, we come up here and we give I want to look good 10 years from now when my nieces and nephews see that I was at Georgetown up here. But I also want to say something real that when they look back, they say, hey, at least Unc tried to address the speeding bullet before it hit the target. And I feel that we have an opportunity. We are the generation of opportunity, even though we are the generation of problems. And I think we just got to address the opportunity more than we're starting to address the problems. I mean, imagine if we all gathered, instead of to discuss these things, we all gathered right now to actually organize against a specific thing that we knew was, you know, affecting a specific outcome. And when we left out of here, we had actual deliverables and action steps that each of us, it wasn't a reach, it's something practical for your life that assists the mission of what we're all actually believing that we're trying to accomplish. That's how they did it in the 60s. They moved the society from the cage, from the Stone Age, at least to halfway. Okay, we can at least sit in the same damn room and have human conversation now. So that's what it's going to take, in my opinion. It's going to take that level of commitment and folks who have to decide if they want to be those people who are committed on that level or not. And I think I reroute back to education. I don't want to talk too much more long because I've been given the spilling. But one thing I think is important, especially in hip hop, what you're seeing, people say, well, all these rappers are popping up dead. But to me, people aren't analyzing why these rappers are actually popping up dead. There's a miseducation on the record industry. We're given, in many cases, you're seeing independent artists who can't walk around with $3 million worth of security pop up dead. They use the internet to become famous. They're actually at war with the corporation. They won't sign the Def Jam. I got $5 million on my own, manipulating the system, doing local shows and touring my region and selling my merch. Why do I need to sign the Def Jam? This is more money than I'll ever have. You are now in direct competition with the corporation. The gravity of that corporation is coming down on these people. And we're having conversations about gangs and this and that when we're not even realizing that the actual polarities between an independent artist who said, I won't sign, and an artist that did sign. Now, this label was secretly owned by Bacardi, Interscope, secretly owned by General Electric. These are people who own private prisons, make nuclear bombs and microwaves. Some kid out of Memphis who got lucky with a SoundCloud hit is now at war with General Electric. That's why they're dying.
You have to stay woke. You have to stay woke. Like, what you're saying, I'll just follow you around. You're stuck with me now. But, you know, that's what our babies are going to be going through. And yes, absolutely, education is key. I threw a spanner on the works recently in a strategy that I wasn't leading, and they had education. I said, actually, can we replace education with knowledge? Because the lived experience is just as important as your so-called education that you talk about all the time, which they were speaking obviously of formal education. And that's part of the problem that we discovered in the Pacific People's Workforce Challenge. The reason why people weren't able to progress, even if they had a degree and one was Pacific and one was non-Pacific, the non-Pacific person would progress much faster than the Pacific person. You know what I mean? It's because they have a knowledge base that says to them that they must respect the people that don't look like them because they are visitors to this country. I'm Pacific myself. And so once you've got this knowledge, this degree, and you're walking out there, but you've got these other cultural things around you that are telling you that you shouldn't put yourself out there because that is something to be shameful of. Because we also have the Bible and religion that came through with colonialism once it arrived to our Pacific Islands. So all that type of thinking is entrenched in the way that we behave. Even if I consider ourselves much more freer than many other people around the world. But it's what you do with your freedom, and what that freedom actually affords you is privilege, and what you do with that privilege is what is important. So I said at the beginning I was privileged with the opportunity to write the creative economy strategy because it was a privilege to be able to do that. The fact that I sit in my job is a privilege. I was a 14-year-old kid who left home with a rap group and moved to a completely different city and started traveling the world at 15. So my education was on the road. So that's my knowledge base, So it's important that it's acknowledged as well. That comes from many sources, many sources.
Thank you, Taramona.
Real quick, I just been thinking a lot about Adrienne Marie Brown. Pay attention to grow the things that you think will grow, and to really shift our minds. I think social media technologies out there really have a way of fragmenting our attention, and doing so to kind of draw our attention away from things that really matter, the values that we believe in. And I think, pay attention to the things that are around us that we want to grow. And yeah.
We're getting down to some of the last minutes of this panel. Is there anything else the three of you want to share before we open it up for questions? We could be here all day.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about the essay that I wrote, if you've read it? Because it took me a while to understand what I wrote. So if you have any questions, we can have a discussion about it and you can tell me what it's about. I write from here. I create from here. And so while I edited and there were drafts, even when I was writing, I didn't quite understand what it meant, but I knew that it was right. And so that's why I sent it. But I don't know what it means, and I don't know what it means to other people, but I know that it is right. I put myself on that paper, and I put my experience at that time. And what it was about was translation. I see myself as a translator, and so did the other people on the panel that I was speaking about. And it was about words, and I hate that word, because we don't have words where I come from. And so if you look at words, language, as a means of communicating and a way of feeling, it switches it around. And the context matters, of course, but it will switch that definition around to mean much more than that, because sticks and stones may break my bones, words do actually hurt as well. So it's such a dumb nursery rhyme, and I never taught my children that because, words are very important, and even how I would speak to them was important. So I call all my children beautiful. My nieces and nephews, I call them beautiful. That's, hey, beautiful, what's up? That's what I call them. You know what I mean? Because I see my babies, my nieces and nephews, they need to be told that they are beautiful. Not in your makeup looks great. No, you come from the same woman that I come from, my mama. She was your grandmother. Yeah, okay, great. You're beautiful. Simple language. Yeah.
Shall we open it up for questions? Yeah. Questions, anyone? Yes, Graham.
Are there, in your experiences or in your opinions, things that sometimes people try to get government and bureaucracies and stuff to do that really isn't their place to do those things?
I feel as if a lot of us in the United States rely on government to determine what our personal moral line is a lot of times around different political issues. And I think it's important for us to understand that we have an autonomy away from the government. And I think that a lot of times as citizens of the United States, it's very important because you go places internationally to visit and we don't realize that we're walking into these countries on these lands is representing the drastic political implications of things that may have happened there before we even showed up. Prime example, I was a cultural ambassador to the country of Jordan in 2019. We were sent by the State Department and the University of North Carolina as a part of a program that would educate youth about hip hop. And we're going into the heart of the Middle East. And there are some very unsavory political things happening. And the U.S. government wasn't always the most favorable folks in that part of in that part of the world. It still isn't, if you see what's going on in the news. And I had to find a way to relate to that community in a way where I was a human who, even though I worked for the government, I was a human coming to these people, learning about their culture, becoming a community member, and understanding even the tensions that were directed at me as a Black American that I may not have fully understood. And that was a new thing because, to be honest, I feel as if a lot of Black Americans who have traveled internationally, we had this back token in our head that we don't really got to worry about the same stuff white folks worry about, the same judgments that white folks worry about when they get here. And in a world where you have now had a Black president who was also an imperialist, unfortunately, you do have to worry about that. You represent the same military that your white brothers and sisters represent. And I had to untangle a lot of that with different people who had lost everything at the hands of the American military while I was working there. And that was a very surreal experience. But so I think that a lot of times we as citizens cannot allow government to determine what our moral line is and what the moral consequence is. We now see that with reproductive rights. It's actually immoral. There's no gray area about it. The fact that people are not out in the streets every day until they reverse this is insane to me. But I live in a country where I guess that's okay.
Thanks for a beautiful conversation. One thing that you all really converge on is this notion that there's this original sin in the commodification of the musical spirit of our species and in the musical laborers who work within this industry. So I guess my question is, if you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, is there a way for musical laborers to benefit from their work economically without feeding back into the same system of exploitation that's been degrading them for so long?
My answer for almost everything is the competitive capitalistic logic that is the entire world pretty much operates on. There's few exceptions. I mean, once I understood that that's the way that the world worked and that's the system, because I've been talking about the system since I was a rapper in 1987, once I became a civil servant and was sitting in the space, I was like, yo, this is dumb. Why do we keep repeating this over and over again? And so my work, I'm looking at a way, for instance, I say economic transformation instead of economic development, because we need to think about how we transform the economy, which is everybody. And so the ecosystem map that we saw before, which talked about all the different bits and pieces that were part of our ecosystem, they were set up underneath this competitive capitalistic logic. And it serves some people, but for the musician, and we heard it clearly from Santi today, it ain't serving her. So we have to really think differently about what we're doing and how we do things. I mean, even for our venues, while we're sitting here, I was thinking, I know venues are hard and it's all of that. So maybe is it from festival to festival that people are touring? Will that make our artists safer as opposed to playing in these little dive bars, which dive bars are important, I know. But you know, when you're talking about a big tour, what are the things that would keep the artist safe at the end of the day, as opposed to going on this 20-date tour that separates you from your family and gives you mental anxiety and physical anxiety because you're away from your family? The system tells you that that's the way that it's supposed to be. I'm not saying that our laborers in those spaces are not important. Of course they are. They're absolutely important in those spaces. But that's the system also. They're also part of that system that perpetuates the same thing, that's obligation to the artist to have to keep on paying. It's money that it's been exchanged. It's not love. It's a job. So as much love that, and I've done all production jobs. I run my own studio. I'm an engineer myself. So I understand all of that. But I have, if you look at my bio, not the one that I gave them, because it would be the whole package would have been my bio. But if you go online and have a look at my bio, I've done many, many things. My first job, I worked as on a construction website, construction site, you know, like a physical one. And I was 14, but I lied and said I was 16. And then they asked me to be a supervisor after I worked there for 6 months. You know, I was working with fully grown men. Most of them were in gangs. And they thought I was a guy because I was a tomboy, you know. And so I think about those different things that I've done throughout my life. And that's what actually makes me the versatile, I guess, if you want to put it on it, because I don't have a label for what I do. I just do. To do all the things that I needed to do for my music, to get my music there. And so I don't think it's my responsibility to have to carry other people in my that have been required in previous times to do things. If I'm looking at shifting the system in a different direction that serves me better, it shouldn't sit on my shoulders. That's up to every individual that participates in the system that is actually designed to keep a majority of us down. That's how I feel about it. But don't get me wrong, I love production people. they're the people that run the logistics and everything. I'm also a production manager, so I love all of the work that's done in that space, and it's necessary. But it's gonna, if the system changes, the model's gonna have to change, and the pieces in the model are gonna have to change as well.
Just quick thought exercise. What if, I mean, the industry is a machine, right? What if we start to deprofessionalize that, not really go through all those things? I've got a 1-minute warning here. Thought experiment continues. So what if we start to see ourselves more like humans, like, Santi was saying, like a mother, right? And then we have children, we have, ancestors, right? And to really put our investments in those places. And what if we distribute the burden onto not just the industry and the consumers, all those people within the industry? What about outside of it, like the developers, right? Like in the city development project, right? They're displacing the drum circle. What if they have to take a responsibility in supporting some infrastructural places for them to thrive too? What if the planning process itself includes cultural asset work that actually gets the commercial industries outside of music to take responsibilities for the overall kind of vitality of the culture and community?
And we're signing off right there.
Thank you for